Hello, my name is Christopher Coker. I am director of LSE Ideas, which is the foreign policy think tank of the London School of Economics. And I'm delighted to welcome as a speaker today our first Jinnah Fellow. The Jinnah Fellowship has been endowed by a former student, indeed one of my former students from many, many years back, Saqib Qureshi. So we would like to thank him for that. And it is intended for a prominent Pakistani scholar to write on peace, conflict, and security broadly defined. Our first Jinnah Fellow is Munis Ammar. I'm delighted to, as I say, welcome him. He's had a very distinguished academic career, which includes being chairman of the Department of International Relations at the University of Karachi, also, of course, former dean of the Faculty of Social Science at the university, now meritorious professor of international relations, and his books range quite widely across various topics, from superpower rivalry in the Indian Ocean to the challenges of conflict resolution in the region, and also the challenges of conflict prevention in Pakistan itself. Today, he will be talking about Pakistani-US relations in the new Biden-Harris administration. As President Clinton used to say in his first term, there were two people in the administration, himself and his wife, Hillary. You may remember she was the health secretary for a while. So in voting for him, you were voting for two. Well, in voting for Joe Biden, I think the Americans were voting for Kamala Harris as well as the second term president. And although he did say in his news conference 2 days ago that he anticipated standing again in 2024. But if you saw the news conference, you'll also understand why he almost certainly won't be standing in 2024. Anyway, let me not anticipate what Professor Ammar is going to say. He's going to widely range from human rights, terrorism, Afghanistan, nuclear proliferation, and putting everything in a geo-economic and geopolitical context, and telling us, hopefully, how bad or how good relations are likely to be between Pakistan and this new administration. So over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much, Professor Christopher. I must thank LSE Leeds for the fellowship, as I'm the first Jinnah Fellow. And primarily, my presentation, as was mentioned by Christopher, it deals with that how the Pak-US relations will unfold during Biden-Harris administration. So three areas which I will touch upon. The first is certainly briefly the background of Pak-US relations. Certainly, I mean, of course, there is no doubt about it that these two countries, early 50s till today, they have a relationship which is inconsistent. Relationship, patron-client relationship. The second part, it will deal with the contemporary, the situation since Joseph Biden, he took over as the president and Kamala Harris as the vice president. So the vision of Pak-US relations during Biden administration, I mean, there are certain questions which we have to contemplate, which we have to ponder on. And the third is about how the US will deal with a host of the issues in which Pakistan is directly involved. Afghanistan is concerned, relations with India, the issue of human rights, terrorism, extremism, and so forth. So the first thing about the background of Pak-US relations, I mean, books have been written, a lot has been said about, but the thing is basically that since 50s till today, three times Pakistan emerged as a frontline state for the US. The first was during the Cold War time when Pakistan joined the Baghdad Pact, which was renamed as CENTO in 1954, and then Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, CETO, in 1955. And that relationship continued till the time the 1965 war, in which the United States imposed sanctions on Pakistan, military sanctions, economic sanctions, things like that. So Pakistan was a frontline state. The second time when Pakistan emerged as a frontline state, that was when the Soviet Union attacked and occupied Afghanistan, 1979, all the way 1979 to 1989, when the Soviet forces were in Afghanistan. So Pakistan acted as a frontline state. The third time, that was when there was the 9/11 and the famous telephone call of the then American Secretary of State, Colin Powell, to General Pervez Musharraf, who was the president, that either you are with us or against us. So the third time when Pakistan-American relations, were restructured. Now, having said that, we have to understand that during the Obama administration, during the first term of President Obama, there was an initiative for some sort of deepening, structuring or restructuring Pakistan-US relations. And that was what he thought, that by introducing a bill, which was called as the Kerry-Lugal-Bremen Bill in the US Congress in 2009. And according to that bill, which was different $7.5 billion of American assistance to Pakistan, but unlike the past, when the military of Pakistan was a heavy recipient of the US assistance, the Kerry-Lugal-Bremen Bill, it excluded the military. So it had a backlash type of some sort of a repercussion. And the Kerry-Lugal-Bremen Bill 2009 all the way. The thing is basically that hardly, you can say, $1 or $2 billion were disbursed to Pakistan. And during the first term of Barack Obama in 2011, things between Pakistan and the US got very worse. Three major incidents took place. The first one was the CIA contractor Raymond Davis in January 2001 to 2011, when he was arrested as he was implicated that he killed two Pakistani motorcyclists in Lahore. And then he was persecuted. There was a trial, and then there was a deal, and he was released. That was the first thing which raised a lot of anti-Americanism in Pakistan. The second was how on 2nd of May 2011, Operation Geronimo, when Osama bin Laden was found in a compound in Abbottabad, the Garden city of Pakistan. And Pakistani military establishment was enraged. Not only the military establishment, the others were also enraged that how come the US Navy SEALs, the helicopter, they sneaked into Pakistan 250 kilometers deep inside Pakistan in Abbottabad, and then they managed to, Osama bin Laden, and then he was killed. And so that was the second thing. The third thing was in November 2011, the Salalah incident, when several Pakistani soldiers were killed because of the firing which was from the American side in the border of Afghanistan. So that is what was Obama's, first term. Even in the second term, and the emphasis on you do more, you do more, you do more. And the US was reminded by Pakistan that Pakistan had done enough for counterterrorism. In fact, the ball was the American court. And the Obama's policy of FPAC, in which he amalgamated Pakistan and Afghanistan. So that is, the rest is history. Now I would like to briefly, touch upon how the Trump administration dealt with Pakistan. And it was basically a bombshell when on January 1st, 2018, the US President Donald Trump, the then US President Donald Trump, in a tweet, he lambasted Pakistan for unreliable behavior in Afghanistan. And he said that the US has foolishly given Pakistan more than $33 billion in aid over the last 15 years, and they have given us nothing but lies and deceit, thinking of our leaders as fools. They give safe havens to the terrorists we hunt in Afghanistan with little help, no more. Now, very interestingly, let me wind up this historical thing, and then I will move on to the contemporary or the current, the Biden administration, that during the Trump era, Pakistan got no American military or economic aid. even I think it happened for the first time that for several years, and then the Coalition Support Fund, the reimbursement for the services rendered by Pakistan for the US operation in Afghanistan and the NATO supplies and things like that, the US also refused to pay the Coalition Support Fund. And the Pakistani defense minister and the foreign minister reacting to what Donald Trump he said against Pakistan, and he said, and both of them they said that we have done enough, and you are exaggerating. In fact, Pakistan has lost around 80,000 people since 9/11. Various terrorist and violent incidents has faced a loss of more than $100 billion because of terrorism thing, and then you are saying that you haven't done anything for us. And $33 billion, we have a record, and we have the evidence of the money which was given by the US, and you owe a lot to us. I mean, you have to pay us billions of dollars which you have not paid, Coalition Support Fund and other outstanding amount. So that is what was basically Trump era. That during Trump era, 4 years there wasn't major activity in Pakistan-US relations. But of course, unlike the Obama years and even before, regardless of his New Year tweet, which was a singular event, that during Trump era, relations between Pakistan and the US were not that hostile. And the Trump administration, particularly Donald Trump, was very much, clear that the US should put its forces out of Afghanistan. Now, there are certain questions which we have to basically raise. Why is it so that every time when there is some sort of a headway in Pakistan-US relations, when there is some positive, development in Pak-US relations, as during the Obama time, it was argued that he sincerely wanted to help Pakistan and to help the people of Pakistan. The Kerry-Lugal-Bremen bill, the purpose of that bill was that the resources, the American taxpayers' money, should not just be consumed by the military of Pakistan or by the bureaucracy of Pakistan or by the politicians of Pakistan or whosoever in power of the government, but it should reach people. So therefore, the idea was that the civil society organizations, the NGOs, working, for example, gender and human rights and other social issues, illiteracy, youth empowerment, de-radicalization of youth, money should be spent, but that is something, it didn't work. And the Kerry-Lugal-Bremen bill, I don't think it took off. Coming to the present era, that the perception basically in Pakistan that the Republican Party having soft on Pakistan is soft on Pakistan. Democratic Party is not soft on Pakistan, is hard on Pakistan, is a pro-Indian, but it proved to be wrong to a large extent because of the fact that the Trump administration and also the Bush administration, George W. Bush, these two Republican administrations were not that hostile to Pakistan, although one can say that the policy of coercion, the use of hard power, and the threats and things like that continued. Therefore, when we talk about the Biden administration, I mean, the US these days is in deep trouble, absolutely. The world is in trouble because of pandemic. It's not only the US, it's everywhere. Then the priority, the foreign policy in case of American foreign policy, in case of Pakistan foreign policy, I mean, the US priorities are different. But certainly, Kamala Harris, when she was not the vice president, Joseph Biden, when he was not the president, these two were very outspoken in terms of human rights violations. Also in terms of Kashmir, the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, that how since June 5th, 2019, a reign of terror was unleashed over there. And when Article 370 of the the Indian Constitution, it was revoked, and Jammu and Kashmir, it was absorbed, within the Indian Union as union territories. So both of them, they were not favorable. What the Modi regime was up to. Both of them also criticized the persecution of religious minorities, particularly the Muslim community in India. Their Citizenship Amendment Act was criticized, that it was Muslim specific. Now they are in power. Once you are in power, you cannot, behave in the same manner. You are different. But so far, almost 60 days have passed since the Democratic Party took charge in the White House. And I would like here to quote, some of the statements reflecting the policy of the Biden administration towards Pakistan, or Pakistan's policy towards the Pakistan's policy towards the Biden administration. So on January 19, 2021, Pakistan's foreign minister, he was speaking in a seminar, Karachi Council on Foreign Relations. So we have set up in Karachi, it's called Karachi Council on Foreign Relations on January 19, 2021. So it was just a day before the Biden administration took charge. And he said that the advent of a new administration in Washington gives us an opportunity to have long-term, broad-based, multi-dimensional relationship. Long-term, broad-based, multi-dimensional relationship. Such a partnership will require an institutionalized and structural respect. A relationship based on respect. A relationship based on win-win situation. A relationship which is not a patron-client relationship. Such a partnership will require an institutionalized and structural respect. There should be a strong Pak-US relationship on its own merits and on its own weight. And something which he said, I think it's very important, that it is compelling because of geoeconomics. So the Pakistan foreign minister, he argued that earlier Pak-US relations were based on geopolitics, on geostrategy, on threat perception and things like that. Cold War, the Soviet threat, the 9/11, the Al-Qaeda, the Afghanistan, things like that. But it should now be geoeconomics. And geoeconomics, basically, that how Pakistan wants the US to open up its markets. Pakistan wants to have a viable economic relations with the US, because the trade between Pakistan and the US, that's hardly $8 billion. I mean, that's nothing. And Pakistan is America's 59th trading partner. So a long way to go between these two countries as far as geoeconomics is concerned. And then I would like to quote here Dr. Daniel Murky, Senior Research Associate at the School of Advanced International Studies, Johns Hopkins University, Washington, D.C. He was speaking in a seminar in, again, Karachi Council on Foreign Relations on January 13, 2021, in which he expressed the hope that since President-elect Biden and his team were familiar with Pakistan and the region, they would like to begin a new chapter in relations with Pakistan, a new chapter. He, in bracket Biden, bracket close, appreciates both Pakistan's scale and strategic and human significance on its own terms. So Pakistan has its value, Pakistan has its strategic importance, but basically a new relationship between Pakistan and the US, which should be win-win, based on win-win situation, which should not be asymmetrical in nature. Now, in order to provide, some sort of a depth in Pakistan-US relations under the Biden-Harris administration, the government of Pakistan, it took a decision. And the decision was basically that it will establish an apex committee. Apex committee of 14 members based on, the ministries of commerce and economy and communications and trade and education and science and technology. So the Apex committee has been formed by the government of Pakistan to review relations with the US. And the head of that Apex committee is the foreign minister of Pakistan. Different ministers and their representatives are the members of the 14-member Apex committee. And the purpose of Apex committee is to explore new areas of cooperation between Pakistan and the US. And that committee will then set the ball rolling and will then, of course, give suggestions to the government and also to the American government that how United States and Pakistan can restructure their relations, meaningful relations, based on equality, based on respect, based on win-win situation. Then there's another quotation, a US State Department statement on January 29, 2021. And that statement was basically given in the backdrop of a verdict given by the Supreme Court of Pakistan, in which Ahmad Umar Sheikh, who was basically implicated in the cold-blooded murder of the Wall Street Journal reporter Daniel Pearl. So Daniel Pearl was beheaded, Daniel Pearl was brutally killed, and the allegations were that Ahmad Umar Sheikh was responsible. That was in 2002. He was arrested, and there was a trial. So basically, the US State Department, argued that the Biden administration wants to stay engaged with Pakistan, particularly on the Afghanistan peace process, despite unexpected bitterness over acquittal order for a terrorism suspect Ahmad Umar Sheikh. So that is one area which has been identified of discord between the US and Pakistan. But what Pakistan can do? Ahmad Umar Sheikh was acquitted by the Supreme Court. He has not been released by the government, and the government has filed an appeal against that verdict. So therefore, that is something which the US is upset about. A telephonic conversation took place between the Foreign Minister of Pakistan and the US Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, which focused on the acquittal order of Pakistan Supreme Court on ensuring accountability of convicted terrorist Ahmad Umar Sheikh and others responsible for the kidnapping and murder of American journalist Daniel Pearl. So that is one thing which we have to keep in mind, that how things may unfold in Pakistan-US relations. And this factor is very important because certainly the American government and the people of the US, they are very bitter that how Daniel Pearl was murdered and the person who was suspected, who was charge sheeted and things like that, and he has been acquitted. Then there is another quotation which I would like to cite here, to quote James N. Lansley. He is a senior vice president, Council on Foreign Relations, New York. James Lansley, he gave a briefing to the US State Department Foreign Press Center on February 9th this year. And in his briefing, he stated that the Biden administration would like to rebuild America's relations with Pakistan and make it more productive than it has been during the recent past. Biden administration had inherited a complicated relationship with Pakistan, and some of the issues between the two countries sort of resonant here in the US. However, like the State Department, he expressed his concern about the recent Supreme Court decision in Pakistan to overturn conviction of Ahmad Umar Sheikh, the prime suspect in the beheading of American journalist Daniel Pearl. On human rights issue, James Lansley, he said that the administration would also have significant concerns about human rights issue in Pakistan, as they did worry about whether or not Pakistan is doing everything it can to prevent, contain, and deter terrorists. Now, let's move on. These are the issues which will continue to linger on between Pakistan and the US. Let's move on as far as Afghanistan is concerned. Now, Pakistan, yesterday there was, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson in Islamabad, he said that whatever the Afghan groups decide, that is the intra-Afghan peace process, the stakeholders, Afghanistan, Pakistan will accept. The problem is basically that the Biden administration is not willing to adhere to the May 1st deadline, which was reached in Doha between the US and Taliban when Donald Trump was the president. And there were at that time also concerns raised by Pentagon, by the Congress, that you cannot leave Afghanistan, not abruptly, you cannot leave Afghanistan in lurch. And there are 2,500 American forces in Afghanistan. There are also, some of the NATO forces there. The thing is basically that Pakistan, what Pakistan can do about to help out the US as far as Afghanistan is concerned. Because the only country which has suffered a lot because of more than 4 decades of civil war and violence in Afghanistan is Pakistan. And Afghanistan is the only country in modern human history which has faced attack and occupation by 3 major parts of the world: Britain, Soviet Union, the then Soviet Union, and United States. So Pakistan is certainly eager, for a smooth sailing as far as the peace process is concerned, but I don't see that. The reason is basically that in case of the withdrawal of American forces, assuming that 2,500 US forces leave Afghanistan by May 1st, and it has been, anticipated that the void and the vacuum, it will be filled by the Taliban, and then there will be the fresh round of civil war in Afghanistan. And which country will suffer most? Pakistan will suffer, because there will be the fresh influx of refugees to Pakistan. Forget about the barbed wire fence, which has been erected on the Pak-Afghan border. They will totally that fence. So Pakistan is very much concerned about it, and certainly the United States, the Biden administration, Zalmay Khalilzad, who is the special envoy of the US president on Afghanistan, he has been shuttling Doha, Kabul, and Islamabad. And primarily, we have to understand that the initiatives which have been taken by the Biden administration. For the first time in many, many years, the United States is now willing to give a meaningful role to the UN. Earlier, UN was bypassed. When the Soviet forces left Afghanistan on the February 15, 1989, the rest 50%, the US decided to leave Afghanistan. And it also didn't encourage the UN to play a vibrant role in Afghanistan. So as a result, Afghanistan plunged into an endless state of chaos and disorder and violence, and it's still going on. So the thing is basically that if the Biden administration has decided to give the UN a meaningful role, and also has agreed that Russia, Turkey, India, Iran, Pakistan, the Central Asian neighbors of Afghanistan, that is Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan, these 3 countries, Turkmenistan, these 3 countries should also play a vital role for peace in Afghanistan. But the problem is basically for the US also, that the US has spent since 9/11 at least more than $1 trillion in Afghanistan. And what is the outcome? I don't think billions of dollars which were spent for the rebuilding and reconstruction of Afghanistan by the US, that Afghanistan is as impoverished, Afghanistan is as insecure, Afghanistan is as conflict and violent ridden as it was before. And the secret letter, although it's not secret anymore, which was sent by the US Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, to the Afghan President, Ashraf Ghani, in which he suggested about that you need to have a transitional, some sort of a government, caretaker government, or a government which can, for 90 days, and after 90 days, there can be a comprehensive accord on Afghanistan. But Ashraf Ghani is not interested. What Ashraf Ghani has done, that he has proposed early elections with the Taliban, they have rejected. So Afghanistan is a major test case in Pakistan-US relations, because there are circles, there are people in the US and elsewhere who still believe that there are safe havens in Pakistan, that the nexus between Pakistan and the militants in Afghanistan and things like that, although Pakistan has denied all such allegations, and that the baggage on the part of Pakistan, that why Pakistan was supporting Taliban, why Pakistan had recognized the Taliban regime to 1996 to 2001, and why it didn't do anything when there was the growing nexus between Al-Qaeda and the Taliban in Afghanistan. Although later on Pakistan it tried to disassociate itself with the Taliban, but it was too late. So that is the baggage which Pakistan is carrying, and the baggage also with the Northern Alliance, the former Northern Alliance, the Uzbeks, the Tajiks, and the others, blaming Pakistan that responsible, that Pakistan being responsible for plunging Afghanistan into a very dangerous country, a country facing human casualties and things like that. The second thing, when we talk about the Biden administration, Pak-US relations, that how such relations may evolve, apart from Afghanistan, which is still going on, and that has to do with Indo-Pakistan relations. On 25th of February, the US State Department welcomed the statement which was issued by the Director General Military Operations of India and Pakistan, in which they decided they will adhere to the 2003 ceasefire, the line of control. During Musharraf's era, that was in the fall of 2003, when India and Pakistan, they agreed to have ceasefire along the line of control, which was continuing till 2014. Till that time, there were violations and serious violations of ceasefire line, Jammu and Kashmir, between Indian forces, Pakistani forces, civilians killed, Pakistan blaming India, India blaming Pakistan, and things like that. And situation got very worse after the Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act of August 5th, 2019. So the DGMOs, both sides, they agreed that they will, adhere to the 2003 ceasefire line. So the US has welcomed that. The US has also welcomed other, gestures, for example, by the Prime Minister of Pakistan, the gesture that Pakistan wants, better relations with India. The gesture by the Chief of Army Staff, General Qamar Javed Bajwa, that we should forget the past. We should forget the past and start. But then, it is not easy to forget the past. Past is a baggage. Certainly, the US can play some sort of a role. It cannot mediate between India and Pakistan, because India will not agree to mediation. It is against mediation. Confidence building measures between India and Pakistan, to re-establish trust between India and Pakistan, to resume track one dialogue between India and Pakistan, because track one dialogue between the two governments, that is under suspension since 2016. That's and the SAARC summit, which was postponed when India boycotted along with Bangladesh and Afghanistan and Bhutan. So 2016 and then 2019 and back-to-back events and things like that. So basically the United States, although it is too early to, expect the US to play, a meaningful role. Certainly, the US Vice President of an Indian origin, but it is not fair to expect her to play that type of a role, which may not be, which may be which may be in favor of India or something like that. So what I would like to argue here is that the Indo-Pakistan, because these two are nuclear countries, and the level of hypocrisy on the part of the Bush administration, that was awful as far as the nuclear thing is concerned. And I must mention it, that when India and Pakistan tested nuclear devices, May 1998, India imposed sanctions against Pakistan and then against India as a punishment. And then demanded that India and Pakistan must revert back to the pre-May 11, 1998. It didn't happen. After 9/11, the US lifted sanctions against India and Pakistan, nuclear-related sanctions. So that's hypocrisy. I don't think that nuclear proliferation has anything to do as far as the American foreign policy is concerned, because the lifting of sanctions against India and Pakistan, encouraged, motivated other nuclear ambitious countries like Iran and North Korea. And North Korea is now a de facto nuclear state. Iran is also down the road. So that is something which the US must confess that has miserably failed to prevent nuclear proliferation. And later on, one can see the emergence of more nuclear states. Now, where do we go from here? I think there are three possibilities when we talk about the Pak-US relations under the Biden-Harris administration. The first is certainly Joseph Biden is an old guard. Former chairman, Foreign Relations Committee. He was the vice president. He's aware of in and out as far as Pakistan is concerned, as far as India is concerned. So how he can, shrewdly compel these two countries to start at least track one. But the question is, which is number two, that after August 5th, 2019, when India revoked Article 370, annexed Jammu and Kashmir, Pakistan cannot. That is the official Pakistani position. Pakistan cannot resume dialogue. Pakistan downgraded its relations with India, recalled its High Commission. Pakistan, the rail link, the air link, and the trade and all such things have been badly affected. And who has suffered? The people of Jammu and Kashmir, they have suffered. So I think the onus is now, as far as the Indians, as far as India is concerned, that one face saving for the Modi regime to get out of this embarrassing and difficult situation with the predicament for India after August 5th, 2019. That is, if the Indian Supreme Court, if it gives a verdict and it annuls the Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act, that is the only way if Pakistan can be persuaded to resume. Because the thing is basically that even if Pakistan agrees, the reality on the ground is different. Kashmir is now, you can say it is now part of India. India is annexed Jammu and Kashmir, regardless. And we also, we were not able to anticipate that why Imran Khan, the Prime Minister, why he had a wishful thinking that in case of Modi's return to power, Jammu and Kashmir problem may be solved. It was the other way around. So that is something which we have to understand, that even if the US succeeds in persuading India and Pakistan, such type of an activity will not render positive results. The third thing is about, that how the US-Pak relations can be restructured. Innovation is required, certainly. Pakistan's human rights record, I mean, we all have problems in terms of human rights. India has serious problems, Bangladesh has problems, Sri Lanka has problems, Pakistan has problems, many countries, every country is facing, Myanmar has a serious problem as far as the human rights thing is concerned. So if there is a face saving, without any face saving for the Modi regime on this Jammu and Kashmir, I don't think there will be any hope for bettering Indo-Pakistan relations. So re-engagement, that is one hope for in Pak-US relations. Re-engagement on the basis of symmetry, that not asymmetrical relations, not client-patron relations, not a relationship whereby we are reminded again and again that you got $33 billion after 9/11, you did nothing, you stab in the back the US, things like that. It will not work because certainly what Pakistan expects from the US is to be neutral, is to be fair, is to be just in its relations with Pakistan, despite the fact that Pakistan has been the most sanctioned ally of the US. Pakistan also a major non-NATO ally of the US. So this paradoxical situation that on the one hand, Pakistan being the most sanctioned ally of the US in the 90s and so forth, and then Pakistan a major non-NATO ally of the US. So therefore, for Pakistan itself, in the foreign policy of Pakistan, certainly the domestic politics of Pakistan, that this is what was said by the Pakistan's former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif in 2016, in which he was reprimanded. In the cabinet meeting, he said that we should put our own house in order. So I don't disagree with that. All of us must put our own house in order. But when the same sentence, the same words were uttered by the Chief of Army Staff recently, when he addressed the Islamabad Security Dialogue a week ago, that we should put our own house in order, right? So what's the difference between the two? Nawaz Sharif had said the same thing and he was reprimanded. Chief of Army Staff, he said the same thing a week ago. He has not been reprimanded. So the house in order, Pakistan's house in order basically means that Pakistan is politically stable, is economically vibrant, is culturally and socially not stratified and polarized. That 220 million people of Pakistan is world's sixth largest country in terms of population. It will be the fifth country. Then it may be the fourth country. Certainly, it cannot overtake China. People of China. It cannot overtake India. It cannot overtake the US. But certainly, it will overtake Indonesia and Brazil. So a nuclear state, absolutely. And then, unless Pakistan is a state which is not termed as a rogue state, that a state where, how there are forces who operate independent of state, actors. They are called as the rogue state, rogue state. So I think we have to deal with our own issues, economic issues, political issues, and stability in Pakistan is is need of the hour. Economy of Pakistan must, perform well. The education, Pakistan's educational system, as far as science and technology, as far as other areas, we can certainly perform better. And if we perform better, the United States and other countries will give attention to Pakistan. And finally, I will then end that day before yesterday. There was an announcement announcement or statement in the US State Department or White House, I don't know where, that President Joseph Biden will host a summit on climate change. 40 countries have been invited. Global warming, climate change, melting of glaciers, things like that. Pakistan has not been invited. Now, we were, surprised that how come Pakistan is vulnerable. I think it's a top 5 countries vulnerable as far as this environment thing is concerned, and Pakistan has not been invited to participate in that summit. But then there was a counter narrative which was published in today's newspaper that from the advisor, the minister, federal minister on climate change or something like that, he said that we have not been invited because we have not spoiled global climate. Only those who have subverted, who have spoiled, who have destroyed, or who have negatively contributed to this global climate, contributed to the fossil fuel and the global warming, only they have been invited. I don't know the truth. That is this the reason that Pakistan has not been invited? So I'm looking forward for a very vibrant brainstorming session, a question and answer session. But to sum up, that how Pakistan-US relations may unfold, will unfold during Biden-Harris administration. Pakistan should make use of the experience of Pakistani diaspora in the US. They are in good positions, certainly. Some of them, they have joined the team of President Joseph Biden. And then the conspiracy theories in Pak-US relations, as the conspiracy theory about that why Pakistan has not been invited in the climate change this summit or conference, whatever it is. So it needs to be reciprocal. It needs to be based on win-win situation. And I'm sure that the United States, to take advantage of the experience of President Joseph Biden and his team. Certainly, they are not hostile to Pakistan. And the perception that the Indian lobby has overtaken the Biden administration, they are in the key positions. I think we have to understand the fact that they are Americans first, then they are Indians. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that very broad summation. We have some questions coming in, but I wonder if I could begin by asking two, as a chairman's privilege. You talked about Pakistan as a frontline state, and you mentioned the 3 occasions, historical occasions in which it was, but there's a new Cold War now firming up between the United States and China. And the Americans will expect people to make choices. That's certainly true of its NATO allies, and I think it'll be no less true of some of the others. So could you just say something about how you see the Pakistan-US relations in terms of Pakistan's relations with China and the tough choices that might have to be made? And my second question, you talked about a new chapter. There's another word, of course, that comes to mind: reset. Americans always like to reset their relations with countries, and those are always disastrous, the resets, because nothing really changes. Do you expect, in terms of human rights, the Biden administration to be a kind of Obama 2.0, liberal internationalist, unlike the Trump administration that wasn't really interested in liberal internationalism, not really interested in human rights? Obviously, the Americans have been very vocal in their opposition to China with the Uyghurs and also Hong Kong, and also Navalny in Russia. It looks as though this is an administration that's going to put human rights at the top of its list, rather than, shall we say, the kind of more pragmatic relationships that Trump was hoping the US would go in for. So those are 2 very different questions.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you have asked about China. I skipped that because, and it's very strange because Pakistan acted as a bridge state between communist China and the US as early as 1971. The secret mission of Dr. Henry Kissinger to Peking via Islamabad. Now, Pakistan certainly cannot oblige the US as far as China is concerned, because Sino-Pakistan ties are deep entrenched. And let me quote here, not quote here, let me mention here that when President Richard Nixon, he visited Peking in 1972 at a meeting with Zhou Enlai, the Chinese Prime Minister, and Mao Zedong, and later on also. So the Americans, they used to remind China, let's forget Pakistan. Let's forget Pakistan if they acted as a bridge state. Now we have direct relations with each other. You know, the Chinese, they felt very bad. And they reminded the US that it is the Chinese culture to, take note of the help given in times of need. They cannot, pursue a policy of using a country and then ditching that country. So that is something which the US should know if it is expecting Pakistan to roll back CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, not be part of Belt and Road Initiative, and President Biden's alternate vision as far as BRI is concerned, it will not work. I think the US should rationalize such type of a policy because China is not what it was 50 years ago, or 60 years ago, or even 40 years ago, or 30 years ago. China is a dragon. China is world's second power. One can question the Chinese human rights, issues in Xinjiang province, in Tibet, and Hong Kong. But certainly, the new chapter in Pak-US relations cannot be at the expense of its age-old relations with the People's Republic of China. It is not that China is investing around $60 billion in the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And there are issues. I'm not saying that there is something which we call as free lunch. The Chinese are now very pragmatic people. And if Pakistan is unable to deliver, as far as CPEC is concerned, is unable to pay back the loans and whatever, then Pakistan should be prepared. What happened to Sri Lanka? What happened to Tanzania? What happened to Tajikistan? Such countries. So I don't agree with the premise that a new chapter in Pakistan-US relations will be at the expense of China's. But when Pakistan acted as a bridge state in 1971, was there any type of an assessment or any type of an expectation or a vision about that China will, become the world's second economic power, and the trade between China and the US? So I think we have to understand the fact that Sino-Pakistan relations cannot be amalgamated with Pak-US relations. No, I don't think it will happen, and there'll be certainly domestic. There'll be domestic repercussions in Pakistan if Pakistan agrees to oblige the US and starts, keeping a distance with China. And of course, the United States has Quad. That is, you have Japan and Australia and India and the United States. So Pakistan is not a part of Quad. And the last thing which I would like to mention here is, which the US should also take note of, that how in the last couple of years, relations between Pakistan and Russia have strengthened. absolutely. And the credit should also go to China because of the Sino-Russian partnership. That is China which persuaded Russia that it should support Pakistan's entry to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as a full member. So it's not like in the 70s or the 80s and 90s. Pakistan and Russia have, I think, not only economic relations, but also strategic and security and military relations. So that may be a factor which perturbs the US, that now look, Pakistan is getting close. It was very close to China. It is close to China. It is getting closer to Russia also. Is it okay?
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. My second question about the liberal internationalism. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, internationalism, globalization, internationalism, that's a reality, absolutely. But it has been exposed during the pandemic that this internationalism, whereby the world community should have acted, with one voice to deal with this lethal source of human destruction, it has not happened. But that was the Trump, how Donald Trump, he disappointed his European allies. When there was a conference somewhere in Brussels or elsewhere about to deal with the pandemic. So internationalism, the theory, it is fine. But then if you talk about internationalism, then why there are, identities, national identities. Of course, you can, with your passport, you can visit more than 100 countries, absolutely. But majority of the countries of the world, they are not getting that privilege as far as internationalism is concerned. If you talk about world government internationalism, then there should not be any restriction on the free movement of people. There are restrictions on the free movement of people. There are restrictions on the free movement of people within one country. So internationalism is now becoming, is more or less becoming a very idealistic type of an approach, because state actors, they are very concerned about their sovereignty. They are concerned about their interests, national interests, other interests. And for them, internationalism can only work if it is in their interest.
Thank you. Right, well, let's move on to some of the questions that have been posed. And can we start with one by Mansur Ahmed, who's actually an alumnus of the London School of Economics, who's asked about India. If you could elaborate a little bit more. He's talking about a new kind of cordiality in the relationship between the two countries, exchange of letters from Modi to Imran Khan, for example. I gathered from what you were saying that you're less convinced about the cordiality. You feel that India is the demandeur in this relationship. It has a clear idea of what it wants from the relationship. So how strong is this? Would you call it a détente or certainly a better relationship than in the past? How strong is it, do you think?
Thank you very much. I have been an ardent, a very strong advocate of Indo-Pakistan peace, Indo-Pakistan cooperation. I worked a lot on that. Mm-hmm. But what do you do? What do you do? When you have a regime in India which is not at all receptive to, and that regime advocates religious intolerance. That regime usurps the rights of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. That regime under CAA, Citizenship Amendment Act, embarks on a very clumsy type of policy. And then the Babri Mosque issue. I'm not trying to, because I don't believe in polarization or augmenting polarization. I believe in building blocks for peace and for a mutually beneficial relationship. We are strange people. Christopher, I must tell you, you must have encountered with many, Indians and Pakistanis and South Asians in London and UK and elsewhere. that there was a time, you know, there was a SAARC summit which was held in Kathmandu immediately after the attack on the Indian Parliament, which took place on 13th of December 2001. The summit was held in January, second week of January 2002. In that summit, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who was the Prime Minister, a very respected person, absolutely, and President Pervez Musharraf. So and that was the very dangerous phase in Indo-Pakistan relations after the attack on the Indian Parliament, because 1 million forces from both sides were eyeball to eyeball. These two countries had almost ceased their relations. So after his speech, General Musharraf, President Musharraf, he went the chair of the Indian Prime Minister Vajpayee and had a handshake with Vajpayee. And Vajpayee was puzzled, was not expecting that. But he stood up and then he reciprocated. There was, after couple of months, there was a summit in Astana, Kazakhstan or elsewhere, where the Indian and the Pakistani leaders were there. They refused to have the handshake. So we are very strange people, that we embrace each other. We basically forget everything, what we had done against each other. And then we refuse to have handshake. So that's something cultural or social, or that is, I don't know what's the problem with us. That relations between or among states, particularly India and Pakistan, certainly India is a big country. And as a big country, it is India's responsibility to take the initiative, to dispel the notion that it is trying to dominate as far as South Asia is concerned. It will not work. I mean, other countries can accept that type of Indian domination. I mean, but Pakistan will certainly not accept. Relations based on equality, sovereign equality, mutual respect, and certainly I believe that policy of non-interference and non-intervention, because it's a double-edged sword. The proxy war, Indian-Pakistan fighting proxy war in Afghanistan. Pakistan has accused India of proxy war in Baltistan, and India accuses Pakistan in Jammu and Kashmir and elsewhere. I think we have to understand the fact that this is 2021. Half of the world's poor, they live in South Asia. And unless we agree to deal with things in a fair and just manner, whatever the issues are, the past, the present, and the future will not be different from the past. So there have been various phases in Indo-Pakistan relations. Cordiality. I remember that when General Ziaulhaq, President Ziaulhaq was in power, that was the best time, best period in India-Pakistan relations. I went to India several times. There was the Indian consulate in Karachi. There was the Pakistan consulate in Mumbai. Visa issue was not a big issue at that time. Although it is said that Zia was secretly, patronizing the Khalistan movement and things like that. But what has happened in the last 20 years, 15, 20 years, that the level of interaction which should have been between India and Pakistan is now minimum. There is no track 2. That is track 2 diplomacy between, the non-officials, the support of officials. There is no track 3. There is no diplomacy, cultural public diplomacy between these two countries, trade, economy, because we suspect each other, we mistrust each other, and that is the reason why we have not been able to develop. And I advise my friends in India and elsewhere also, that the only way, and also it applies in case of Pakistan, that if a country wants to develop, if a country wants to progress, if a country wants to modernize, if a country wants to have a mark as far as the world history is concerned, then that country must focus on, as far as its own economy is concerned, good governance, human and social development. Look what Deng Xiaoping had done. Open door policy, 1979, and the policy that China will not interfere and intervene in the affairs of its neighbors militarily. And the last war which China fought was against Vietnam in January 1979. So that gave China a lot of space because it was concentrating on its own issues. China and India have issues, but China is India's largest trading partner. Russia and China still have issues, border issues, territorial issues, but Russia and China are good neighbors. The problem is basically with India and Pakistan that we have not been able to learn from history. We have not been able to understand the fact that a relationship must always be based on equality, sovereign equality, on justice and fairness, non-intervention, non-interference. And Pakistan has said that if India takes 2 steps, Pakistan will take 4 steps. But I don't know. When you have a regime which has a venom against Pakistan and which loses no opportunity to malign Pakistan, that is something which is very unfortunate.
Thank you. Let's take some more questions. Now, there's one touching upon the question I asked. This is from Andalib Alavi, which is about the anti-China alliance comprising India, Japan, Australia, etc. Now, of course, Europeans. Just to widen that into the Indo-Pacific, which has now become the, I would say, chief operational theatre for the United States. It's intending to go in that direction. The Indian Ocean is going to be a hotly contested area. China is threatening to displace the United States in the Middle East as a very close partner of Saudi Arabia, for example. That's on the cards in the next 10 years. The Iranian relationship is extremely important with China. So just extending this into the Indo-Pacific, and India, of course, if it does move closer and closer to the United States, if it does, I think it's a little skeptical about embracing the United States in a kind of unqualified way. But could you just say something about that as well, the Indo-Pacific region, and how that will figure in the next few years?
Yes, Indo-Pacific region, the Indian Ocean region. Certainly, yes. These two are not in terms of militarization, or nuclearization. You may have, of course, there's American 7th Fleet there. The Chinese, they have their own military presence. Certainly, the Soviet Union is not to be seen because there's no Soviet Union anymore. Earlier, there used to be superpower rivalry. So the superpower rivalry, the US-Soviet rivalry has been replaced. The American-Chinese rivalry. And now Russia is the junior partner of China. We should not ignore this fact. The Chinese are very, I think, clever people. We should not underestimate. A policy, step-by-step policy, the US also had the same policy. It got independence in 1776. Then there was the Monroe Doctrine of 1823, 2nd of December. Then there was the American-Spanish War, 1898. So how the US was able to become a regional power, and then the First World War, the Second World War, the dismantling of European imperialist powers, and the vacuum which was filled by the United States and the then Soviet Union. China will not commit the mistake. China, we have to understand that pursues a policy of patience. Taiwan, which they call as their integral part, certainly. They have said that we can wait for 100 years for Taiwan to come back and become part of the mainland China. So I don't think that China will commit the mistake of utilizing its resources as far as military. That is what is the American and the Indian and the Japanese and the Australian strategy, to drag China into some sort of a competition in the in the Indo-Pacific region, or the Asia-Pacific region, or the Indian Ocean region. If China falls into that trap, and falling into that trap will be very dangerous for China, because I don't think that China can afford to match with $670 billion of defense budget of the US. The US defense budget is $670 billion. China must not commit that mistake. China needs to basically, and it understands the fact that time is on their side. The US is a declining power. As far as India is concerned, they will take care of India. Absolutely. Because of the fact that the mistake which India is committing by dragging itself, in the regional affairs, particularly with Pakistan, it will drain its resources. And that is something which India should not do. So I don't think that China will, be in that vicious cycle of active power rivalry in the Asia-Pacific or the Indian Ocean. But certainly China will not keep the field open. Africa, we have not mentioned. That Africa, how Madagascar, Tanzania, Angola, Mozambique, Nigeria, I mean, these countries and other countries of Africa, that in a big way, China is investing. So that is investment. That is the soft power of China. The policy of soft power, diplomacy, aid and trade, and that is something which the US should have been doing. But it is more the hard power than the soft power. So though I don't buy the argument that in coming years there will be a matching type of the superpower rivalry, what used to be between the Soviet Union and the United States, because China wouldn't like to end up as the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union collapsed not because, despite the fact that it had around 10,000 to 15,000 nuclear missiles, it collapsed because of its economy. It collapsed because of its political disorder. So China wouldn't like to commit that mistake of draining its resources for matching with American naval buildup. And because American resources are also limited now. We have to understand that. The US resources, US is not what it was 30, 40 years ago. The US debt is more than its GDP. And the pandemic has taken the toll of at least $3 trillion. It's not the stimulus program of $1.9 trillion and earlier $1 trillion. So $3-4 trillion just gone to deal with this pandemic. So China is not, I don't think it will commit the mistake of militarizing or reciprocating to the some sort of offensive American, Indian, Australian, Japanese offensive. It knows how to play its cards well.
Can I turn to another question, actually, from the sponsor of your fellowship, Professor, and that's Saqib Qureshi, who asks the question, which I think is perhaps the billion-dollar question here: is Pakistan's interest in the United States progressively diminishing? And if I can just add to that, where would you put the United States in terms of priorities for Pakistan? I think from what I can gather, China is probably now the number one partner. I mean, the Chinese say they don't do allies and alliances like the United States, they do partnerships. The United States would be what, number 2 or number 3? And will its importance to Pakistan diminish considerably over the next few years?
Thank you, Saqib Qureshi Saab, for your question. I think what I have gathered is basically, and at the outset, I made it clear that the US is facing a difficult situation. It is not only pandemic, it is also its domestic issues, its to deal with China and then to deal with other unresolved contentious issues. With Pakistan, diminishing interests. I don't think it will happen. It will happen so easily. Although Pakistan's foreign minister, Mr. Shah Mahmood Qureshi, and I quoted him, that the shift from geopolitics to geoeconomics, if that thing is taken into account, then certainly Pakistan will have a role. Pakistan will also have a role in terms of Afghanistan. The US will need Pakistan as far as Afghanistan is concerned. Since the United States has an age-old relationship with Pakistan, regardless of the mistrust and the polarization and things like that, the US still has deep-rooted ties with the Pakistani military, bureaucratic, and political establishment. There is no doubt about it. So if it is diminishing, it will be, I think, not a long-term, it may be a short-term phenomena. But it happened earlier also that the relations between these two countries diminished. It happened after 65 war. It happened after 71 war. It happened after the Soviet military withdrawal from Afghanistan when the US imposed sanctions on Pakistan. It happened in the second term of President Obama. It happened during the term of Donald Trump. So it all depends on Pakistan itself. As I said, that if Pakistan is able to give priority as far as good governance, rule of law, justice system, economy, political stability, then certainly as the world's sixth largest state in terms of population and a nuclear state, the only nuclear state in the Muslim world so far, Pakistan has its importance. Absolutely. The US cannot disregard. But India is a big country. So there is no comparison between Indo-US and Pakistan-US relations. But you have to understand that historically speaking, it is the US which approached Pakistan to a large extent when there were security and other issues. So diminished relations, and it is too early to predict about because it's only 60 days, another several months to go as far as the Biden-Harris administration is concerned. And the Pakistani diaspora, if the Pakistani, those who are smart enough, those who have a clout, as far as the Capitol Hill is concerned, as far as the Pentagon and State Department is concerned, then certainly they can lure the US towards Pakistan to a large extent.
Thank you. Can I ask you to look at two questions now? One is on geoeconomics. The question has come in. What exactly are the geoeconomic factors that we should be looking at? I think we all know what the geopolitical factors are because we've been just discussing them in the last half hour. What are the geoeconomic factors that should figure prominently in the relationship between the US and Pakistan? And the second question is on Afghanistan. What do you actually... I don't think you're in the prediction business, as you said, but I mean, it looks pretty clear from this part of the world that Taliban will probably be back in power in the next 2 years or so, the way things are going at the moment. Whether the United States can live with that or not is a moot question. Can Pakistan live with that? And do you think that is in fact a likelihood, or do you think that that's what would be seen as a threat in the West of a Taliban government is exaggerated? Is it a kind of different Taliban than the one that we were dealing with back in 2001? So there's two questions.
the second question first. I don't see the possibility of Taliban again coming to power. I mean, everything is possible. I'm not saying that it may never happen, but I don't see the possibility, because the reason is that it's not only the Uzbek and the Tajik and the Hazara minorities in Afghanistan who are against them to a large extent, the Taliban. Even the Pashtun, a segment of the Pashtun. And why the Taliban should come to power? I mean, if they want to, and I have written also trying to justify that if Taliban, they want to come to power, they should join the political process as a political party, contest elections, and if they have a victory in elections, then they can come to power. But then their wishful thinking that after the American withdrawal, military withdrawal, they will just, as it happened in 1994, 95, 96, they will take over Afghanistan. It will not happen. It will not happen because the people of Afghanistan, I don't think that they've forgotten their 5-6 years of rule. So that is not, I think it will be the right kind of prediction that the Taliban coming to power. It's like a blackmailing type of a tactic which has been used that vis-a-vis the West, that you must remain in Afghanistan, otherwise the Taliban will come to power. And again, there will be nexus between the Al-Qaeda and Taliban, and it will become a sanctuary of terrorism. So let's not, I think, speculate about Taliban coming to power. What may happen is basically the fresh wave of violence in Afghanistan. Therefore, President Biden, he wants some sort of a transition whereby a caretaker government is formed, including Taliban, if they agree, and that caretaker government, after a couple of months or maybe a year, reaches an agreement, a comprehensive peace process, elections, and otherwise, the status quo thing may remain. I don't think the Americans and the West, they have decided as of now to permanently exit from Afghanistan. The exit strategy is there, but exit strategy on their own terms. And they blame Taliban that they have not complied with the Doha agreement. They have not, things like that. So let's keep the fingers crossed about. And what about Pakistan? I said that in both cases, Pakistan may be in trouble. If the American forces remain in Afghanistan, Afghanistan will continue to face violence and terrorism. If the American forces leave Afghanistan, there will be a vacuum, which will result into the fresh outbreak of civil war and the fresh influx of refugees into Pakistan. So in both cases, Pakistan will have problems. Geoeconomics, it's a very fascinating term, that how geography of a country determines its economy. But geoeconomics, in case of Pakistan, US, primarily when Shah Mahmud Qureshi, the foreign minister, he talked about a shift from geopolitics to geoeconomics. He was basically referring to soft power. He was referring to vibrant, meaningful trade, commercial, economic relations between the US and Pakistan. And that is true, not in Pak-US terms, but it is also applicable as far as other countries are concerned, because now it is the geography of a country. Pakistan's geography certainly is very obvious. And how Pakistan's geography, its mineral resources, its natural resources, its fertile lands, its mountains, and things like that, desert, rivers and canals and all that. And then the problem with Pakistan is basically that it is not able to make use of its geoeconomics. That Punjab, which used to be the breadbasket of Pakistan, not anymore. For the first time in recent history, we are importing wheat, we are importing sugar. Although these two crops, Pakistan was self-sufficient in wheat, Pakistan was self-sufficient in sugar, self-sufficient in food, but Pakistan imported $5.5 billion worth of food items in the last 1 year. So if Pakistan's economics is not in good shape, cotton, Pakistan, a cotton growing country, we are importing cotton, which is very unfortunate. And that is the reason why our textile exports have diminished, because the cotton production in Pakistan has gone down and we have to import cotton. So that is something which we have to bear in mind, that unless a country's geoeconomy is in better shape, it cannot be transformed as far as power is concerned.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Unfortunately, I see we've only got 2 minutes left, so not enough time to raise another question. But time enough for me to thank, first of all, Munis for coming along today and sharing his views. And by the way, he will be writing a strategic update for us, which will be available on our website in digital form in the next few months. Secondly, I'd like to thank the audience for the questions that you've raised. And thirdly, since Saqib is here with us online, to thank him again for endowing the Jinnah Fellowship. And I hope there will be many more fellows coming along in future. But thank you very much, Munis, and to everybody, and hope to see some of you soon. Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.